welcome back to another episode of the Addy Hour. As always, I'm just honored to be able to host these conversations. As you'll notice in these recent conversations, we're bringing in some different types of topics, want to kind of keep things fresh and relevant, but also just get at the heart of really some important issues. So today we're jumping in and talking about Black bodies and race in art and society. And I have two wonderful guests who I think you all are really going to enjoy hearing from. They already had some good chemistry together off camera, offline. So I'm actually really curious to see where this conversation is going to go today with this important topic. But by way of introduction, I'm going to go ahead first and introduce Daniel Swann. Daniel is an assistant professor of sociology at Goucher College. He completed his doctorate in sociology at the University of Maryland, and then also before that earned his undergrad degree at Rutgers. He's taught a whole host of courses, including courses on comparative social media, Generation Z, race and ethnic relations, social movements, wealth, power, and prestige, and also data analytics, so a wide range of topics. He also has academic interests in race, atheism, and religion, and political sociology and social psychology. He's the author of some books, has also contributed to some book chapters. One book I wanted to highlight is his qualitative study of Black atheists, Don't Tell Me You're One of Those, that was published in 2020. In addition to the work that he's been doing, he also taught at University Park, Maryland before joining where he is now. So Danny, I just wanted to welcome you again to the Addy Hour podcast.
Awesome. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. And yeah,
of course.
Chemistry, just makes me think that things are gonna go really well. So
yes, I anticipate that as well. My second guest I would like to introduce is Imo Imeh, who is a visual artist and a scholar of African diaspora art, whose work considers historical and philosophical issues around the Black body and cultural identity. His work has been exhibited in numerous venues across the Northeast and the U.S. His work is also represented in the Petrucci Foundation Collection of African American Art, also in the museum collection of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. His work's been featured on PBS NewsHour, New England Public Media, and other places as well. And this year, in 2023, he has actually partnered with the medical journal Biological Psychiatry to have his work appear on the cover of 6 issues. And that's something that I've been able to be involved in as well. So grateful for the work he's doing on many fronts. Imo is someone who actually graduated from Columbia University in 2020 or 22. Oh my goodness. That'd be nice. 2002. And then earned his PhD in history of African American art at Yale, where we actually overlapped as grad students. So Imo, thanks so much for being here on the Addy Hour podcast.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be with you, Nee, and wonderful to be with you, Daniel.
Excellent. I'm not trying to make you too young. That was just a slip of the tongue at that point. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm just going to leave that one there.
Hey, I teach a writing for art and the artist course at Westfield State University. And I start off the course by showing my students a paper that was heavily destroyed by one of my professors when I was in college. And I put it up and it said 2001. And you heard the gasps.
Oh no.
2001? And I stop it. Yes, I am that old. Yes.
Yeah. We got that gray going. Danny, somehow you're avoiding that so far, so I'm impressed.
Yeah, I graduated undergrad in 2008, so I got a few years.
All right, you got some time.
I'm hoping I follow my older brother's aging patterns. So yeah, he looks 35 still.
Oh my goodness. Well, if you learn some secrets, pass them along. So just to jump in, as my listeners know, I often just like to do a check-in. I appreciate you all kind of sharing some of those stories already, but just to see how you all are doing at this point in 2023 with everything that you're doing on campus, everything we're navigating as a society. So Danny, if we can actually start with you, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Professionally, I have a few things that I'm working on and hope to finish up a couple of them during my sabbatical in 2024. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've got something coming out on political rhetoric. I've got something coming out on race and interpersonal interactions, and maybe a group processes thing coming out too. I'm really excited about that. I've got some student collaboration going on as well. Also putting together my tenure portfolio here. So it's quite a hectic time. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting all those projects off the desk during the sabbatical and out. So everything there is good. My family is great. Like, you know, soccer is a big part of my life because of my son. He's awesome. Shout out to Friends United, by the way. And yeah, so everything there is just really good. Just chugging along, trying to, like I said, get this workout.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Definitely appreciate you sharing that, and not surprised that you've got your hands in so many things with so many projects going on, just from what I know of you. So that's encouraging to hear as well.
Hard for me to say no. Thanks for asking, though.
Of course. Imo, what about you?
Yeah, we're plagued by the same demons in terms of an inability to say no. I thought I had shaved down what I was going to be doing for, about a year ago. I canceled a bunch of things. People were very upset, and I am still overwhelmed. There's so much going on right now. I'm already planning out into 2024. So this is going to be interesting. I just on the heels of the opening of the first major comprehensive solo exhibition of my studio projects, Benediction and In His Name, and that exhibition is titled "The Hope of Radiance" at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center in Pittsburgh. It is a stellar exhibition. The installation is exquisite. It's way beyond what I expected it to be.
Wow.
And so that's very exciting. I just curated a group show that is up at Westfield State University, titled Something Extraordinary, and a visual review of story as timeless. So there are 8 African diaspora artists that I've brought together to have a conversation about story with their artwork. And it's a very expressive, amazing exhibition. The artists are all very excited to be a part of it. And I'm currently putting together a group show that will involve myself, and I think it's 6 other people now, but it's called The Miracle Machine. It's going to be in the fall, and we don't know what it is we're doing. There's a musician, there's 4 artists. Wow. Someone said the title should be, 4 artists, a musician, and a poet walk into a gap. And we don't know what we're going to create. And so UMass Amherst is very excited. It's going to be like an incubator think tank space that will grow over the course of the fall semester. So anxiety, because I don't know exactly what will come of it, but that's where we are right now. So other things, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that honestly as well. I mean, even as we're, for those who are listening, talking on screen, I'm, thinking about the overlap between, obviously we do work in different sectors, but 3 Black men on the screen in academia talking about taking on lots of different things, trying to make impact. So there's lots of different directions that we could go, but I definitely appreciate how you all have been honest about that. And, tenure package coming up, all these art exhibitions coming up, planning to 2024. I mean, there's so many aspects that I can relate to on that as well, just in terms of things that we've been doing and how far in advance we have to plan, things we have to say no to in order to say yes elsewhere. And so I think even that sub conversation is constructive for listeners as we just think about how we navigate in these different spaces. But even before we get to that, because I know you've both talked about your work a little bit, I was just going to have you all talk about your journey into your academic professions too, especially as Black men. And then as we also think about this topic of Black bodies. So Imo, why don't we start with you? How did you actually get into this work in the first place? If there's a short version.
I've always been an artist. I was very fortunate. I'm product of a divorced family, my divorced home. That's a part of my story. My 2 Nigerian parents. That's a part of my story too. And so there's when I came to New York to live with my mom, and I began to really jump into the art scene. I realized that I wanted to go into this as an area, and she encouraged me. So I went to the High School of Art and Design, and by the time I graduated, I knew I wanted to go into an academic space where art wasn't what I was focusing on necessarily. So I went to Columbia, and I was an art historian there, and the field of art history allowed me the chance to dive into research which is what I really, really wanted to do on some level, but I never stopped making art. And so it was always very, very confusing to the institutions that I've been a part of, including the one I'm at now, where I'm an art historian. I don't teach studio art courses. How I navigate between the spaces of art making and art interpretation. And I think that there has been this way that people have wanted to place me into a box, especially as a Black man. You can't be a creator and an interpreter. You can't be both. And I'm like, yes, I can. White folks do this all the time. They can be curators, they curate their own spaces, but there's something about the way I present. And I think it has a lot to do with my big Black maleness that causes people to want to put me in a particular box. They didn't like it at Columbia, they definitely didn't like it at Yale. And at Westfield, I think they've embraced it because they've seen what can come from it. In real time, they've seen it. And so this is a space that I'm still trying to figure out. I'm being a very bad art historian. I'm not doing a lot of writing right now, but the work that I'm doing is certainly contributing to the field. And so this is where I am when I speak to other students, when I speak to students and other people who are thinking about diving into art. They're like, well, how did you do this? And how is it like, well, this is the pathway that allowed me to, this is the pathway I chose to be a researcher and to do art, not art on the side, but art as really the center, the creation process as the center of my research. And it's informed everything.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that honestly too. I mean, it's just from, kind of childhood on, there's a lot we'll definitely come back to and unpack there. That you've pulled out. But just before we do that, just want to jump to Danny real quick and just hear your story too about how you've gotten into this academic endeavor across so many different aspects of sociology.
A lot of my own personal interests, a lot of timing, and a little bit of luck. So I'll go back. My parents had different religions. Neither one of them was particularly convicted. Neither one of them ever took me to either place of worship ever. So I grew up without a conception of God.
Okay.
Time when that was being an atheist, let alone like never having believed in God, was seen as very strange. So that was always something that I liked reading about and stuff like that. So I had that one interest. At the same time, my parents were also, my mom's Jewish, my dad's Black. And so there was always really interesting racial dynamics. I grew up in an all Black neighborhood. My mom was the only white person in the neighborhood. Wow. So I always had lots of interesting things happening about race. And then my mom was born in the 40s. So she was raised at a time when being Jewish wasn't all the way encompassed into whiteness yet. Later, she accepted that she was white, but up until like the 70s, she told me she fought it. And, so lots of interesting things there. And so I just always wanted to, explore the intersections of a lot of those things. And, I was one of the kids that would, skip school sometimes to go to the library because I was really focused on learning about these things. So I was reading philosophy books and all that. At a really early age, had aspirations to be a philosopher, actually. Got to Rutgers. I went there because at the time it was the #1 philosophy program in the world, or maybe tied with Oxford, and took 16 or 17 philosophy classes, loved my professors, and was the only Black kid in every single class except for And as I started reading this stuff, I was like, man, this is really stodgy. There were a bunch of issues I had with it. So right at the end of my undergrad career, I had a bunch of professors come to me, and this was lucky for me. They said, we think you have a lot of potential. Have you ever considered these other tangential sort of careers or where you want to go? And they suggested public policy. I actually had one put me in touch with Cornell West, who talked to me, and we developed something that I could have possibly done. Personal circumstances led me back to Maryland, and their sociology program really embraced me. And something like Imo said, about 6'1", like 215. And I literally had some of the Black professors at Maryland, and this was a really important part of my life, come to me. You need to know when you walk around here the way you do and you dress the way you do, that people are going to see it a certain way. Doesn't have to be good or bad, but you need to be conscious of it so you can operate within these bounds and get to where you need to go. Dr. Patricia Hill Collins was one of those people. Dr. Chris Marsh, who just wrote a book on the Black middle class called Love Jones, was one of those people. Dr. Rashawn Ray. So just having people fall into my life at the right times. And then as soon as I got in the classroom, I loved it. I could do and say so many things that I thought were valuable to me and the class. And just since I TA'd my first class, I was like, I think this is such a worthwhile existence to be a professor, to engage in work that will eventually trickle into classrooms and influence, what people read, what people think. And so, yeah, it was sort of just a path that just sort of happened before me. And I just.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you sharing that story. I mean, I think a lot of people just, in hearing that will just be able to gain insight and maybe even understand that they didn't have before. Just, because sometimes I know for students, when they walk into our classrooms or see us in different settings, they don't know the journey to get there. So it just helps to,
They're all so much better high school students than I was, or almost all of them at least.
Yeah, which is scary for me sometimes.
Now, but yeah.
So again, just appreciate you both sharing that. I mean, I know we're going to talk a little bit about Black bias representation in art and society, but just with what you both mentioned, I just wanted to lean in a little bit to like your own experience as Black men. Like, what are some of the things, because I know you both talked about people kind of prepping you for that in some ways, or things that you saw. What are things that surprised you in your experience, and kind of how have you navigated to thrive in a sense? Dan, maybe we'll reverse it and start with you this time.
So again, some of the things that surprised me were just what was normal to me was not, acceptable, was not within the bounds of what people were looking for, and definitely not what people expected. Like I said, I almost always went to schools that were 75, 80% Black, even when I was in like really advanced programs. And so being smart, being articulate, those things were not surprising. And then all of a sudden I get to college and people are offended that I'm raising my hand so much and that I have opinions, and that, my God, he actually knows the answer before everybody else. And I was not ready for that. And so I definitely needed people to help me out. Again, understanding that, navigating that, not letting that bother me. And, not to, because those are really good and important qualities for a professor being in academia, and not to let those qualities, sort of be drained out or beaten out of me. So again, now that I know what I know as a sociologist, I shouldn't have been surprised by those things, but I was, 17, 18 years old. I had only had the experiences that I had growing up in Prince George's County. Like I just showed my classes now, we're talking about contemporary segregation. I live where my kids go to school, PG County. The school system has 120,000 kids, only 3% white, right? And so that is the kind of experience that I had, basically. And then again, going to these PWI big states, it was something that I needed help with. And like I said, I've just been lucky to have people there for me. Yeah.
Just to follow up a little bit on that, and you talked about this a little bit, but how you helping or informing or guiding your students in that process too, even as you think about your own experience, the knowledge you have as a sociologist, and paying it forward, so to speak?
Multiple things. So one, and sometimes they ask me, but I generally dress like this every day, like in not awful, but like in a way where I'm like living my authentic Black body. To show them that, maybe some of these stereotypes aren't right. And, I think sort of just living that every day. I know like Jody Armour and Cornell West wear their afros. for the same sort of reason. Like Jody Armour says it's his hoodie, right? And so I try to live it. And I also, you know, through my experiences, try to, and I've been all over different demographics because of my parents, that I can sort of translate a lot of what I have learned across different spaces. And so that's really what I try to do in the classroom, is bridge any gaps, use myself as a foil, so we can just like have a medium to talk about these issues. And yeah, so like I said, I really try to use that strength in terms of across different groups.
Yeah, that's really good. Definitely powerful. Imo, anything you want to add, either to answer the question about your own navigation or even riff off of anything that Danny?
Yeah, I was gonna mention the notion of serendipity or luck, or like there's, you know, for all of the intelligence that people have claimed I have, or that I have thought that I may have had, I think so much of my arrival at where I'm at has come from just the kindness of just good people, people who decided to care at a particular time. The idea that I've arrived where I'm at by myself is it's a false one. And so I always find it really interesting when I encounter, you go to a conference or you speak to people, and it's almost like they've prepared to be Dr. So-and-so for so long that you get a sense that the phone going off, for example, in the middle of a conversation like this would be catastrophic, right? And I've just never been able to arrive at this place where I take myself so seriously that I lose my sense of humanity, you know? And I think that's what my students connect with the most. I will sometimes dress like this in class, and sometimes I'm wearing a t-shirt because I'm coming to class from the studio and I'm going back to the studio to work. And I tell them what I'm working on. I'm like, I'm working on this drawing and it's kicking my butt right now. You know, that's why there's charcoal on my shirt. But when I first came in as a professor in 2009, I thought I was supposed to be wearing blazers or a suit, or I just had this feeling that because I teach at a predominantly white institution, and there was a sense that it was my part of my job or burden was to make it clear that I'm worthy of this, that as a Black person I can do this, and to demonstrate to the white kids in my class that I really understand my field, and to demonstrate to my department that I was going to do this well. Now, everybody could see and can continue to see now that the level and the quality of work I was bringing was way beyond what they were even asking for. But it was so hard for me to accept it because there was this feeling that I'm just above water. I'm not actually there. And at any given time, a rogue wave could come over and just drown me. So when I first got into Columbia University, from the High School of Art and Design, it was a really, really big deal for my high school. I was waitlisted at Harvard. That was a huge deal, you know, and I just knew that they'd made a mistake. In fact, the first 2 to 4, I'll say 2 months of my time at Columbia University, in my dorm room, I waited for notification from the head of whoever to say, we made a mistake, you're not supposed to be here. Because I was struggling. When I first got there, I was stumbling through these classes. I was trying to figure out who I was in all this sea of white folks. And the few Black people that were at school were trying to figure out who they were too. And there's insecurity and there are weird things that are said because of that. And it's like, I can look back on it now and be like, oh God, we were all so young and stupid and just trying to figure things out. But it still haunts me, some
Mm,
of what I went through that first semester, until I figured out how to do undergrad.
mhm,
And then when I got to Yale, it was even worse. It was
mm,
even worse because this thing that we study called art history, this thing that we study, which for me is not just a thing to study, I live it. I roll around in charcoal and paint. This is what I do for fun, right?
mhm,
It had become so dry and philosophical. And here I am, big black me in the class, and they're asking me a question about the thing we just read. And I'm like, did we all read the same thing?
mm,
Because my take was so violently different.
mm,
And the way I spoke was so casual. And I'm like, this is art. I do this every day. Like, no, I don't care if you're using big words. Like,
mm,
I do this every day. I know this.
mhm,
And I just, it took me such a long time to understand that I was just coming from a completely different worldview from most of the people at these institutions.
mhm,
And that it wasn't my job to change my worldview. It was my job to just shine in the way that I could,
mm,
be myself. But it took a while. It took a
yeah,
while. I wish I could say that it was with great confidence
mm,
that I walked through the halls of these institutions. But even now, I shudder as I
mm.
remember. I shudder
Wow.
as I remember. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's real. And I know that people listening, there's going to be lots of folks that are going to be able to relate to that too. And then also, in a sense, even get encouragement from you sharing the challenges to know that, okay, if they're navigating through that, it's not just them. Because, like, I mean, even as you
Yeah.
described that, there's
Yeah.
so much isolation in how you just described that, even though you saw other people navigating those same pieces in isolated pods. And I know my mental health piece is coming out too, but that's the first thing that came to mind as you were talking. Definitely,
I don't
definitely.
think people talk about the failures enough.
Yeah.
And I don't think people,
Yeah.
when I say people, I mean in general academics, but I think that Black academics in
Mm,
particular should grow more comfortable
mm,
discussing the failures, because these spaces haven't gotten any easier
mhm,
for the next generation of Black and brown people. They
mhm,
haven't become easier.
mhm.
We're dealing with the same
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
right? And so the idea of not sharing, my gosh, one of the things I share with my students is I tell them, if you do well this semester, remind me at close to the end of the semester, I will tell you how I almost got kicked out of Yale story. About how the papers that I submitted were so not up to par because of all of my anxiety
Mm,
that they almost threw me out. I
mhm,
shared this conversation openly with anyone who will listen, that I graduated, got my PhD, and I'm doing very well, but they almost threw me out. They
mhm,
almost threw me out because I was looking for myself, and it took me so long to figure out who I was at that
mhm,
school.
mhm.
But I'm so comfortable sharing that. I've seen other scholars cringe when I talk about it. I'm like, why are you cringing? It's my story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
somebody needs this.
Exactly. Yeah. Danny, anything you want to comment on, either like from your own experience or your lens? Because you talked about that too, like now what you know as a sociologist, how that also impacted you looking back and thinking about, okay, that's why I was struggling here or navigating this way. Any thoughts in
Um,
general?
for sure. And again, it was just like my background was very different. Like, both of my brothers were street dudes, had been in
Mm,
jail a lot, and like those are still part of my
mhm.
influences. And um, yeah, it just I have something specific actually.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and again, it has to do with mannerisms and what's normalized and what's taught. So, again, grew up talking, conversing a certain way. And for whatever reason, again, maybe it's because of where I went to school, never had grammar in any level of school, not in third
Mm,
grade, not in fifth grade, not in ninth grade, not in 12th grade, never, never. Right. So I'm in all these AP language classes in high school, and like I write well, so I'm getting like B's, but I'm always getting my papers all marked up and whatnot. And then I get to college, and the compository writing, or expository writing, I forget what the name of the class was. I'm getting really good grades in that, and my teacher is really impressed with the way that I can interpret passages and all of that. And she even assigns me to help a couple students in the class that are struggling. And then we take a final in that class, which isn't graded by the professor, but graded by a random grad student in the English department. And it's graded very technically. And I failed that final. First semester, freshman year. I had all A's in other classes. So I was like, I can do this. But it was this thing that I was never taught. And combined with the fact that how I normally talk and normally write is culturally alien to a lot of those people, that I ended up failing that class. And that, you know, again, my mom was really supportive of me in that. My dad was really supportive of me. My other professors were really supportive of me, to not let that get me down. But my second semester, I had to repeat a class, right? And I still ended up graduating with honors in philosophy and sociology. But those trials are real, and a lot of times just aren't prepared for them. And you can't know unless you have somebody who has the experience and knowledge. You can't really know that you're not prepared for certain spaces. And so
no, you can't know.
Wow.
I got an A in the class the second time.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's really poignant. But I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but it just speaks to that whole meritocracy commentary that I know a lot of people have been having that conversation. Some might hear us and say, oh, we're hearing this again. But I still think sometimes people just don't want to admit that's because, you had another TA, everything shifted at the last minute. And someone from the outside could be like, oh, well, he just didn't earn the same X, Y, and Z as everybody else, ignoring the fact of what you were exposed to early on, how that impacts you in that situation, and how the other professor was giving you feedback, like all of that. And then how that's just used to kind of, keep people in their place, for lack of a better word. So
I still can barely use a comma or semicolon. Drop them in there haphazardly and let editors fix it now. But
somebody needs to hear that. Somebody's gonna need to hear what you just said, because I wish that I could look back on all of these experiences with fondness, but there was so much of it that was uphill fighting for me. And so like but I do look at my undergraduate experiences with fondness, because like I said, there were people who chose to just be kind. They saw a diamond in the rough. And so, I bring this up because it was those decisions that certain people made. Adam Rothman, who was at that time a PhD student teaching a course, and he's doing big things now. But like, he pulled me aside. He's like, Imo, when I see an A, I'll give you one. Here's what you need to do. And a lot of my issue was scaling back how much I was saying, because I was able to get to the crux of my arguments much faster with shorter papers. There were two different professors that pulled me aside and said, oh God, you're doing this all wrong. You wrote 7 pages here, but the last 4 pages were brilliant. The first 2 made no sense. And so like someone had to teach me how to harness what they all said was a gift for writing. They all said, no. You're one of the best writers we've ever seen at this stage. I'm like, I am? Like, yes. Then why don't I have an A? Because this is a terrible paper. But we can see what you can do. And so pulling me aside and showing me line by line. But it took time. And so now as a professor, I remember that. I remind myself of that, and my students, I show them my old papers. And I sit with the ones who really want to know. And we go through it line by line until we understand, how we can be better, but I can't, for anybody who would say, well, that has nothing to do with race. You're making everything about race. Like, why are you talking about race? Why would you bring up race in this kind of instance? Because race was such a big part of it. the fear of speaking in those white spaces, because you felt like anything you said would represent your entire race. You know, having certain professors pull me aside and say, Imo, you've been really quiet in class lately. Why? And not being able to admit that I heard two white girls snickering in the corner when I was speaking and immediately thought that I sounded stupid. The professors had to find ways to get me to speak. And then once I was open, it was like, it was over, you know, but race is so much a part still of this college experience, especially for Black men in schools such as these.
Yeah, really well said. And I appreciate, again, just how open you are with your students too, and just kind of taking them on that journey. Danny, you look like you're going to reflect on something.
Oh no, I just really agreed with what he said.
Yeah.
To try to employ a bunch of the similar practices.
Yeah.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
There are these moments, I know we're talking about Black bodies or we will, or we already are. And I don't remember every moment of my time at these institutions, but there are a couple that stand out to me. And there was one when I was at Yale in the music library is easily one of the most extraordinary, beautiful things ever constructed. It's just such a beautiful space, you know. So I would just go in there sometimes and just sit there, you know. And I remember, and there were these moments where I would completely forget who I was in this space. And there was one particular time I was walking by in there, I greeted somebody really warmly, and they just looked me up and down, and I was like, okay. And then I went to the bathroom and I caught my reflection. I'm seeing this big Black, always sweaty. There's a sweat on my face, book bag. And I'm just like, damn, I forgot. I remember that moment when I saw myself in the mirror and I'm like, damn, I forgot. Like, why would anybody not greet me or smile, you know? And I was just reminded in that space, it's like Negro, this ain't your space. You know, this is how I felt there. And I had a few moments like that, but this is one that just I'm reminded of. It's not that it was all gloom and doom. I had some wonderful things that happened in these institutions there. In undergrad, Sudhir Venkatesh, I realized that my way into art history as a study, my way into research of art history happened through ethnography, happened through sociology. Sudhir Venkatesh's class opened up my whole worldview. Like, I'm like, wait. So I could study African and African-American artists as a sociological project? And he had me do an independent study with him. It's not easy, but he walked me through that slowly, methodically, carefully, and brought me to this place where I could begin to understand how art history and sociology and archaeology and all of these things are very, very, they're not as divided as you would think, depending on what it is you're trying to study. As an Africanist in art history, these things are all very, very connected. And so I had good moments. I just want to make it clear that the race part is not something that's easily divorceable.
Yeah, it's part of it. Yeah.
Well, I'll add one real quick thing, and that is, both of us went to undergrad at the peak of color blindness in this society. We weren't supposed to talk about those things, right? Like, that's when they were like, "I'll get the chip off your shoulder" or whatever. I think there's now a little more space for talking about those sorts of experiences. But again, like 15, 20 years ago, there really wasn't. So yeah,
that's a really good point. Just to pick up on that a little bit too, because the one thing we were going to talk about is just like how you all think about these topics in your current roles, both what you do in the classroom and like how it impacts society. So Danny, I was just going to follow up with you, like how does that, because I know we've talked a lot about, the wealth gap pieces and some of those other things and how you introduce your students to those concepts. So how do you think about maybe this isn't exactly what you do, but how you think about the concept of a Black body, even as you're teaching all these different classes on all these intersecting topics, and how you kind of pass that on to your students to really make sure they catch the realities.
Right, good. One of the things I try to drive home across all of the different subjects that we cover is that there is so much evidence that there is a social and racial hierarchy in this country. Blacks, the most consistent thing is that Black people are at the bottom, right? And so I try to, depending on what we're covering that week or whatever, relate something to that, right? And so like today we were talking about implicit bias, right? And to literally show an experiment done of, you know, here's a white kid acting this way in a park, here's a Black kid acting this way in a park. What are the reactions of the society around going to be? The way that Black bodies are treated in each and every single, you know, scenario for the most part is different and almost always qualitatively worse, right? There are some times where I show them stuff and they think it's white guilt, and that not necessarily worse or better, but most of the time they think that it's qualitatively worse. And so that's what I try to sort of get across, right? And even in that one specific video, right, it just debunks so many stereotypes that white people are supposed to be scared of these like wilding thugs or whatever, right? When in reality, it's almost always the Black body that's put in jeopardy by acting any way outside of the norm, doing something deviant, that a white kid is allowed individuality and not always running about those things, that Black bodies are often in really vulnerable positions, and often in really vulnerable positions where authority figures have the ability to do something to them, right? Suspend them from school, arrest them, put them in jail, right? These sorts of things. And that just cumulatively, it adds up to so much, right? It adds up to stress. It adds up to lower life expectancy. It adds up to, you know, building up all these stereotypes about Black deviance and criminality when it's treated different from the beginning. And so, yeah, I insert bodies so they can like really understand and empathize rather than just see a bunch of numbers. Like when I show numbers on the wealth disparity, they don't want to believe it. The wealth disparity is 10x. It's been 10x for 50, 60 years. I'll give them a quiz. They just don't want to know. They'll still put 2 times or 4 times, right? But when I actually am able to get them to visualize bodies or hypothetical people, it clicks better.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm still taking that in.
Just get it wrong on the test because I refuse to hear it. Jeez.
And it's been very consistent. That one question, especially across.
It's very telling.
Yeah.
It's very, very telling. It says it all. It says it all. Okay. I on my end, you know, that I mean, they're the courses I teach, but they're also the special projects that I do. And just by way of this conversation we're having about Black bodies, there was one that I did at Westfield State University, which is, like I said, a predominantly white school. And I should tell you that here's how I arrived at this project. It's a project titled 17 Years Boy. And I still don't know what that project was, and I'm glad it's over, to be honest with you. But before that project started, here's what had happened, all right? Donald Trump had recently been inaugurated as president. You can determine at another time if any of the following things were connected to him. There was this huge Charlottesville, you know, incident. It was brought upon by riots, by white nationalists and white supremacists, and there was a whole lot of whole lot of wickedness that looked white there. Okay. In Charlottesville, and people died. One person died, 2 cops died, 3 people died, I believe, in that. So that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
Someone in my church, a church I no longer attend, predominantly white church, white evangelical church, had posted a noose to his Facebook page, public. He says in response to Black Lives Matters and all of a sudden, because treason, they'll say, they're no, not lynching. Traditional way of, treasonous would be, so it's a news, well, yeah, we know the history of Black people with news, but that's not what I meant. So he posted that to his Facebook page. I won't go into that story, but a number of things happened and didn't happen as a result of that. And then school starts. And 2 weeks into school starting, Black students are accosted with racist language written on their doors. Nigger, go home. Or niggers live here, or whatever it was. It sounded very, very 60s. It's really interesting how the language hasn't changed much. So, and so all of these things are happening. And there are people planning marches because of the racist incidents at Westfield State. There were rape threats to black girls that were there. All kinds of things were happening. That semester in particular was hot, but it wasn't just at Westfield State. It was happening around the United States, okay, at a number of different institutions. And so I decided to have a project that would look at the life and death of Trayvon Martin. Because people were asking me, are you going to be at this? Are you going to be at this protest? Are you going to be at this? I'm like, everybody leave me alone. You all go ahead and do your marching, whatever's going to make you feel better. But I'm going to do what artists do. We make things. And so I brought together, it was a collaborative project that involved the 17-hour-long, it took 4 days to do, painting of a portrait of Trayvon Martin that was destroyed at the 17th hour. Nobody knew it was going to be destroyed. It was an extremely emotional work of art. And many people are still wondering what happened. People were asking, well, why is he doing this? The people who were criticizing it were like, this doesn't make any sense. Trayvon, that was like 6 years ago. But it was weird. In the room that I constructed, you could hear the sounds of the Zimmerman trial. Like that was playing. So it was like you were walking into a time warp where you were 6 years prior. We were all living in that moment where this boy who was brutalized was dragged through the Zimmerman trial. It became the Trayvon Martin trial. We all lived through that, about how he could be killed twice, And so there was this conversation about Black bodies and the things that happened to us and why, graffiti on doors such as "Nigger, go home" or "Niggers live here" in then 2017, 2018, really, you can draw a line to it. And it's a national one and it's a local one. And it confused a lot of people. A lot of people felt good that it was happening as well. And I was completely devastated when a very, very high-ranking person at the school, when it was all done, came and said, this has just been amazing. When are you gonna do it again? And
wow.
I looked at him. Here we had put together art, the music department had come together, the English department, there were songs. It was a very emotional thing in commemoration of Trayvon Martin, but also of 17 other boys over the past century, starting from 1915, who had things like this done. So it was a shrine. And this man came to me and said, please, Imo, we need to do more of this. When are you going to do this again? And I was like, I don't know. Let's see. The next boy is going to be killed next week. Let's put it together again. It was very odd and missing the mark, And so there is this way that I can imagine that Danny has poured himself out into a lecture or into a work of a piece of writing, or into a talk, only to have the point just gone. And you wonder, are you shouting into a void that just consumes what it is you're saying? Is there any way that change happens? Is what I'm doing, does it actually move does it move anything?
Mm.
And that's something that I wonder often. I mean, I'm still, when I'm done with you guys, I'm working on the next thing, because the conversation has to continue. But there is this fear sometimes that people are seeing the artistry and missing the point. That worries me.
Absolutely. I've had a number of instances like that. And yeah, it is tough to deal with. I would say that like that's where like individual emails or something, like maybe a text from a student, even if it's a couple years later, be like, I get it now, are really valuable resources to, you know, keep you going.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's sobering, but like those little pieces, those little things, like I said, make a huge difference.
Right.
So, yeah. Well, one thing as a last pivot, I'm curious, and now I'm really curious, just the way this conversation has gone. I'm curious what keeps you all going. Like, what gives you hope in what you're doing? Because I mean, we've talked about, I mean, there's obviously the passion for the craft that you have, but there's also the challenges, and you've done a nice job of kind of laying out that reality. But just, and I'm sure our listeners are curious too, like, why are you all still doing this work? What keeps you moving besides those texts and those messages? Dan, you want to start?
It's not the huge academia checks either. One thing is
the collective laughter of academics.
Of course.
Oh gosh.
We're relatively okay, but we're not buying any NFL franchise anytime.
No.
So there are like real world tangible things that give me hope, right? I've seen since I've started doing my work with atheists, specifically Black atheists, there has been some stigma lifted around that, and that especially within the Black community, I've seen some of that stigma lifted. And I think even at least as importantly, some of that more secular public figure Black history reclaimed. So in terms of seeing more Black faculty and certain institutions really trying to live up to ideals, I do have hope from those things. And so I try to lean into that you know, that there is hope to fix the things that have been really slow, right? Like actual fixing or narrowing of racial disparities that has been slow going, if no going at all, right? The wealth disparity, home ownership gap, those things are bigger than when Dr. King spoke in 1963. But the progress that I see on the interpersonal side, again, lends me to just want to keep chopping and hope that we can have enough cross-cultural understandings and eventually some paradigm shifts that lead to places where we start to see outcomes being more equal. We start to see the qualitative treatment of different groups being much more equal, much less disparate. And so that's really the world that I'm hoping for. I think that it's achievable. I've seen individuals make the change. So that's what gives me hope. The thing that, you know, scares me is just how incentivized racism has become on the right wing, especially. And that is a very strong competing force to what I want to see. And it has a lot of money, and it has a lot of power, and it has a lot of structural things going for it in terms of minoritarian government prevailing quite a bit in this country. And so, yeah, I hope that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
I've got
definitely
to overcome that obstacle because of the things that I've seen within people, especially. Again, some institutions, but the institutions have been very slow to change in this society.
Yeah. I definitely appreciate that perspective. I mean, as I'm reflecting on what you're saying, it actually reminds me of the story you were talking about with the wealth gap and how you just, you're continuing, because that's in a microcosm. The students might not be seeing it at first. You package it in a different way. Eventually they catch it. And just
Right.
hearing you talk about that on the societal level in terms of stigma for Black atheists or other types of things that are moving at the individual level, institutionally, that gives me hope hearing you say that, because I know that's a tension that I feel often, especially I know even in this podcast, like, okay, or what am I doing in the lab? What am I doing with students? Is it making a little difference here? Is it making a difference society-wide? Where, and that's this almost, it almost sounds too selfish in a sense, because it's almost as if I'm saying, where am I feeling like I'm actually making an impact in someone's life or in someone's lives or in society? So to kind of hear you package that for me is also just really helpful.
It reminds me of something I said to my wife when about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was the fallout of Beyonce not winning a Grammy. I don't keep up with the award show, but I think it was a Grammy. And I said to her, well, I didn't listen to that album, but she did. I heard it in the background. It was okay. But I said to her, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have even had a public discussion about should a Black woman have won a Grammy.
Yeah.
So we need to acknowledge what's racist, what kind of bias are going on over there, but also that there's hope because we're in a different space than we used to be.
Yeah, that's good perspective. Imo, I'm gonna give you the last word.
My hope is in the relationships that I'm forming with, I think, some of the most extraordinary people as I create and as I deal with the various themes, in my work as an artist, as a professor, and just as a human being. So the relationships bring hope for me. I'm not working in a vacuum. Things are happening. The world is moving. And what I do as an artist is just another offering. It's another offering and an opening for a conversation. I sometimes find it easier to deal with my emotions around a series of things, through the avenue of art. And what I like about it is that I don't always know what I'm doing. In fact, most of the time I don't do sketches before I do the final work. It comes out as a unit. It's how I work. And it's pretty honest when it does. It's perhaps more honest. I'm more honest in line than I am when I'm speaking. And there's something childlike about making things, starting at nothing and then making it. There's something a little narcissistic about it. I'm deciding that is going to be something when anybody looking at it can say there's nothing there, right? And so somewhere in that tension between a God complex and a child is the opportunity for a new kind of conversation to start. And because God is always making new things, I just don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what it's going to do. And there's hope in not knowing, if that makes any sense. Like, so, we think that, we think we know what the next 5 minutes will bring, right? And fact is, we don't. There's somewhere in there that gives me hope, that something really extraordinary could take place. I think it's childlike, but I'm okay with that. In terms of being a teacher or a professor, it's still in the relationships. I was teaching, when I teach my art survey courses, it's a general course in art history. I always start with Africa. I have my reasons. I've never been a part of an art survey course in my training that is started with Africa. I start with Africa, and we go through it. And I have, in one of my classes, I have one Black kid, two Black students. And this one guy, he is just sharp. He's a brilliant young man. He's a first year. And I was talking about something, I forgot, it was a video showing of some ritual or a ceremony, and there were women dancing. And I was trying to stay focused. But I panned the room and I was giving this impassioned end of the lecture, and the smile on his face, he was just looking at the screen. It looked cartoonish. He was beaming ear to ear, and he waited till after class to meet with me. And he's like, I don't know how to look. I'm African American. That's Africa. There's got to be some kind of genetic memory. I know those women. I know how they're moving. I get that. Like I feel like I'm related to them. So he was explaining, he didn't know that I saw this big grin on his face, but he was explaining how he was feeling in that moment. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be at this school right now. He needs this. And there are students like him that need this right now. And so there's hope in that for me. There's hope that I'm in the right position at the right place and time, that my being in this particular moment means something to the people who are gathered around me. And I'm okay with just that.
It's a great juxtaposition from the undergrad not feeling like should be here to that moment giving you the exact opposite feeling of I should be here and this is exactly why.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Great illustration. Wow. Well, I'm grateful to both of you. One, for just the work that you all do on a daily basis. I mean, even not despite, but amidst everything that you all navigate, just to get to where you are, as you all shared so powerfully and eloquently, and then just the impact it's having on that generation. Definitely full circle, as Danny mentioned. So thank you to both of you for the work. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to actually be here to share this. I know listeners are going to get a lot out of this. I know I'm just anticipating there's so many things that people are going to be able to relate to or have their eyes open to at the same time, or a little bit of both. So definitely appreciate what you're all doing. Hopefully this will give other people hope as well, as we all try and move forward as a society. So Danny, Imo, thanks so much for being here. Definitely appreciate both of you.
Awesome. Thank you. I had a blast. I had a blast too.